Welcome, everybody, to another special author event. Today, Pages Promotions is presenting Jared Morningstar. We're going to have an awesome evening tonight of poetry and story and conversation with an indie author from right here in Michigan. It's going to be a good time. For those of you who don't know, Pages Promotions is a local Michigan indie author advocate. We support indie authors in their creative journey from concept to publication and promotion with equitable mentoring, professional services, and enthusiastic advocacy for writers of every age, stage, and genre. So that's who we are at Pages Promotions. Tonight, we're going to be talking with Jared Morningstar, poet, storyteller. He's also an educator. He's also an amazing dad and an incredible husband. And we're going to talk about all of that. But real quick, here's the bio you'll find on his Amazon page. Jared Morningstar is a high school English teacher and adjunct English professor. Ooh, big stuff, Jared. Didn't realize you had that collegiate thing going on.
I do, yeah.
He loves to write poetry and short stories that reflect his interests and his observations of the world. In addition to literature, Morningstar loves music, playing guitar, late night dinner experiences, and long road trips. We'll talk about those. He lives in Michigan with his wife and children. And oh my gosh, are those kids adorable little buggers? Oh my goodness, they're so cute. So, tonight, we are going to talk about poetry and story and process, because I've got an English professor in the room and I'm not letting you get away without talking about process.
Sounds great.
So we'll get into all of that conversation. But first, I'd like you to read from American Fries. This is the first book. I'm just going to go back and share this real quick. Let me find it again. There it is. There we go. So American Fries was your first book that you wrote, and this book came out in July of 2020, right?
That's correct.
Awesome. This is a collection. I've read this great collection of short stories and poetry. And what I find most interesting about this collection is that, whoops, there we go, technology. What I find most interesting about this collection is that you write what I like to call free flow poetry. It's not metered, rhyming, traditional, classic style poetry. So again, I got an English professor in my room. I'm going to ask you, how do you differentiate when something is a poem versus when something is an exponential essay? How do you draw that line? Because some of your work I read and I went, wow, if he just added a few more words, this could be a really cool essay. So how is it that you differentiate that line between those styles of work?
That's a really good question. And it reminds me actually of something my wife has told me more than once. She's told me that, wow, that's a nice piece, but that sounds like it could be prose. And I'm not surprised when I hear that, because I think that even though the majority of the stuff I've written lately is poetry, I'm still a prose writer at heart. And that's definitely my strength as opposed to more traditional poetry. You mentioned rhyme and meter and poetry with rules and stuff, and it's never been my strength. Whenever I've tried that before, it falls flat for me. And to be honest, it's not even my favorite poetry to read. Most of the poets that I enjoy, like I think you called it free form. I usually call it free verse, but it's essentially the same thing. There are no rules holding it together, nothing like that. I think that when I think about essays, though, and prose, the kind of prose essays that I think you were talking about, I tend to think of either like a personal narrative, which kind of reads for me like a short story. And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the poems I write, even though they sound prosy, they're not. They don't have a plot. And and like when I think of a short story or even a personal narrative, there's usually a plot and a theme and an arc. And my poems don't really have that. And when I think about the most of the poems I write, while there might be a narrative, it's it's mostly it's an expression where I'm not focused on storytelling so much. Even if there is a narrative, it's more about expressing an idea or presenting an anecdote, for instance.
So it's more of a snapshot moment in time of
Right.
expression rather than explanation. Does that make
That's
sense?
it. That's exactly how I would put it. Thank you for that. Yeah, that's exactly it. It's more of like a snapshot, a moment, a moment of an anecdote. It's not like an essay with a full arc that's trying to prove something or show something or argue anything or tell like a complete narrative. It's not that. It's
Yeah.
more just like a quick expression, like you said, a moment in time.
Okay. Awesome. That's again, I've got an English professor in my room, so I think it's really important that as authors, we not only entertain but also teach.
I
You
completely
know,
agree.
because so often we get readers who say, "Wow, how did they come up with that?" I hear that a lot. How'd you come up with that idea? When we watch Neil Gaiman's interviews on YouTube, one of the first questions is always, "Where do you get your ideas?" And he has this wonderful long explanation about going down into the basement and digging through a bag of things and magic and unicorns. And then he turns around and says, "Yeah, no, that's not it. You just have to work at it." Right? A lot of people don't realize that it's work and that it does take
Sure.
this thought of where to draw the dividing lines and how do we differentiate our craft. So,
Absolutely.
much like painting, there's the difference between acrylic and watercolor is huge.
Absolutely.
So,
And what's really interesting about that is sometimes, at least with me, I will write something and it will start off as one form and I'll have to switch to something else because I realize it's meant for something else. One of
mhm,
the pieces that I'll read later that I've picked out started off as a poem and I kept playing with it and playing with it and it wasn't working. And then I realized this could actually be a small story.
sure.
And when I finished it as a story, it made perfect sense.
Yeah.
So that it happens sometimes.
Yeah.
You know,
And the reverse happens as well.
of
When you
course,
find that, no, you can condense it and it can be more powerful if it's a shorter form.
that's right. Absolutely.
Awesome. So I want to hear a little slice of American fries. So if you can give us a little taste of that, I have a penchant for French fries anyway. So I was really tickled when I saw that that's what you named the book, and then deflated when I found out you didn't actually write about French fries. So in in your next book, do that.
All right.
Ode to the French fries, right?
Absolutely.
So
Yeah,
if
there's
you could
just a couple of brief allusions, but nothing about fries specifically.
I know, I was really disappointed. So, okay, if you could give us a little reading, and again, this is your night, sir, so you get to read as much as you like. Go ahead and give us just a little flavor of American fries, if you would, sir.
Sounds great. Uh, I was going through the book a few days ago, and I was trying to think of what I was going to do from the first book. And I think it's appropriate, being that it's Teacher Appreciation Week, that I would share a poem I wrote about myself as a teacher. And but it's not just about teaching; it's about growing up and getting older and taking on more responsibilities and such. But this piece is called Confessions of an Aging Teacher. He held them in the palm of his hand, lifting them high above his head like Atlas, his knees buckled. Knees that were older now, knees that were forced to support more weight now, all on what would have been enough sleep at 25 and single, but not at pushing 40, with insomnia every night because he has a 7-year-old who thinks she rules the world and a 7-month-old who just figured out how to open kitchen cabinets and is addicted to electrical cords. And he has to find money to feed them after bills are paid. Wait, how many lives am I holding? Looking upward, he saw dreams in vulnerable eyes. They couldn't tell he needed coffee, that his heart was pounding off beat, that his arms were shaking, that his knees were cracking. But he closed his eyes and kept his failing frame steady. I can't let them fall. I can't let them down. He knew their lives depended on him, just as his children's would one day on them.
Well done. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Let me ask you, how has your experience as a teacher informed how you grow your craft?
You know, that's a really great question. I don't think I would be writing anything if I hadn't become a teacher, if I wasn't teaching literature, if I wasn't teaching creative writing. Uh, because if you're going to teach something, and I know that this is something that's been said by a number of people, and I've found it to be true. If you're going to teach something, you have to try to make sure that you have a really strong handle on it. You can't just like try to teach something and do it really well, and then it turns out that you only kind of have a handle on it yourself. And I take my job seriously. And so when I sit down to teach a concept when it comes to writing poetry or fiction, or I'm going to talk about symbolism in literature, I sit down as a professional and try to really make sure I understand these things. And my college education did a great job of preparing me for that, kinda. I mean, but I was still a novice, like I was an undergrad,
Sure.
And so, part of being an educated person is also continuing that education when you're out of the classroom. And I wanted to do a good job. And so I read a lot more short stories and poetry. I didn't even read any poetry really until I started teaching. I had so many kids that wanted to write poetry. I figured, well, I should really, they want to write it. They want to explore it. I need to know what's going on. And I became a poetry fan and later a writer of it because of what I was doing in the classroom. What I was doing in the classroom, I guess then for one thing would be it helped strengthen my understanding of the art of writing and the art of literature. And that helps. I
Sure.
tell people all the time, not just the writing aspect, but if you're going to become a good writer, I firmly believe that you have to read good stuff and you have to read a lot of good stuff. Not that you're going to copy great writers, but you're going to like see things they do and you're going to pick up little nuances and tricks here and there and you can adopt them into your own creative aesthetic.
Sure. Do you think it's also, I'm sorry to interrupt, but this
You're
just
fine.
hit me. Do you think that it's also just as important that you get exposed to the bad stuff too?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that I think it's and I've done this before with essays primarily, but we've taken a look at a lot of rough drafts. In fact, I've shared some of my own really bad poetry that I wrote several
Yeah.
years ago with kids to and students to show them, like this is what I did. Look at compared to like some of this stuff to this stuff that I'm writing right now. And then we look at our own drafts. It's kind of, I know we usually talk about the drafting process and revision process with essays, like papers and stuff, but we do it all the time in my classroom with just workshopping.
Sure.
We'll read, I call them hot off the press, something that they just wrote 20 minutes ago. And then we'll analyze it. And then kids will bring in new drafts of it, sometimes several drafts of it over the course of months. And we keep, I tell them, you got to keep working at it and tinkering at it and keep making switches. And then so,
Till it feels right.
right, absolutely. And so that's part of it, recognizing what's good, seeing what other people have done that need work, seeing what you yourself write that needs work, because it's not like, for me at least, it's not like writing a paper. if I'm really careful when I write an essay or a paper or whatever, and I can usually get away with writing a paper in maybe a couple drafts. One
Hmm.
first draft, go back and make a few revisions. And if you're careful, you can get away with it. I could never do that with creative writing. And I tell
Hmm.
kids the same thing. Like you're always going to be going back and finding little things to fix. And then if you start submitting stuff, um, I just read from
Somebody else
American
is going to
Fries.
find it, right?
Well, yeah, other people are going
Yeah.
to tell you that it's not any good. The story Slice of American Pie comes to mind, and American Fries. That
Hmm.
story I submitted so many times over a 15-year period, and I kept addressing their comments and giving it to people to read, and I kept adjusting and fixing things, and eventually it became a story that is probably still the one that's the most talked about in that book, but it takes
Well,
time.
I can understand why.
I'm glad you like that one.
It's pretty powerful piece. So, but again, the power of that piece comes from the multitudes of revisions that you did.
Absolutely.
There are, I know, for all of us, the singular occasions where something comes out and you think, oh, this is exactly what I was looking for, and you're very happy with it. The majority of it doesn't work that way.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah, creative writing might be creative, but it's also work.
It's very much work. It's more work than paper writing for sure. Um,
Yeah.
but I'm lucky. The other thing I was going to say about teaching is getting inspiration from the kids, from my student writers. I'm just blown away. But once they get into the process and once they start really figuring out how to do this well, and I read some of the stuff they write, I'm like, holy cow, you kids, some they're writing better than me. And that, and I only get a chance to really work with them close for the couple of years they're in my classroom. And some of the stuff they produce, it just blows my mind. And listening to them give comments and to each other and really good feedback and honest.
That conscientious critique, that's really cool
Yes,
to watch
yes.
happen.
And to
Yeah.
watch it happen without ego. And
Yeah.
and so they inspire me to write as well and to learn new things. So I've given some of the pieces I've written to students before. I'm like,
Yeah.
here, take a look at it. Tell me what you think, because I trust their
Sure.
opinion.
Well, and fresh perspective is always a good thing.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So while we're on the subject of inspiration, before we talk about the next book, um, who would you say are your biggest literary influences?
Oh, that's a really good question.
I get
I
that
think,
question a lot.
yeah, I think that when it comes to poetry, my first and greatest inspiration would have been the Beat Generation. Um,
Okay.
Ginsberg was the first poet I really fell in love with. I just love Allen Ginsberg's works, and I went and I found the Gary Snyders of the world, the Diana DePrimas of the world, Jack Kerouac, and I would just read all kinds of this stuff, and I loved the way that they threw all the rules, like all that poetry that I read in high school that was all like form and old, like, like 300 years old, dead white guys, that kind of stuff. And I read this new stuff and I'm like, wow, this is really good. Like, I like this. And it was full of social commentary and they were
Hmm.
talking about the world and they're about serious issues. And my love of poetry has kind of expanded
No, it looks like
beyond
we,
that. Now
there you are.
and these, I find myself, yeah. Okay, good. But I find myself, reading a lot of uh, a lot of hip hop poets and slam poets and reading their stuff. And I
Hmm.
think that's probably why I'm more attracted to the more of the modern poetry, just because those are the poets I like to read. And so, oh, and the Rust Belt stuff. Philip Levine was just fantastic. And stuff like that. When it comes to fiction, I find myself, I usually like more traditional storytelling, but at the same time, Slice of American Pie reflects my love of George Saunders. Um,
Hmm.
and So I think, and then I mean, I love like the Southern writers like William Faulkner and Flannery O'Connor, and writers like that. But I think that even though even though the Rust Belt stuff that I read is primarily poetry, I find that their poetry even impacts my fiction sometimes.
Sure.
So it's probably as far as like the kinds of writing that I love to read, and I find myself emulating, would really be probably stuff that's come out maybe within the last 80 years or so. Like I don't go too back before that.
Okay. All right. I'm going to share my screen one more time and remind everybody what your book covers look like, just because, it's kind of the point, right? so, so American Fries was the first book. And then the second book you wrote, which is your newer release, it's a COVID release, American Reality is your second book, and that came out in mid-February this year. Can you tell me a little bit about this book? And most, I have not read the second book yet. It's on my TBR, but I'm mostly interested in how it differs from American Fries.
Okay, that's a really good question. American Reality is I sometimes I call it a companion piece to American Fries.
Okay.
American Fries, for those who haven't read it, American Fries I described as kind of like a snapshot, a general snapshot of different aspects of the American experience. Um,
Right.
with politics and pop culture and food and family and all that stuff. And there's some social commentary in Fries, um, but it's a broader range of topics. American Reality, I think, is that too, but it's more thematically consistent.
Okay.
And it's a darker book. It's a
Okay.
darker book. And the majority of what's in reality is inspired by a lot of what's been happening just in the past year. I think that overall, it's probably the more political of the two books. But that's not the only thing that's affecting it. There are multiple pieces in here that allude to COVID. Um,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of social class pieces. Um, keeping the working class, lower class people down, kind of stuff. Commentary
Right.
on class. Um, and so it's probably the more critical of the two books. It's still an examination of America. There's still but there's not as much, I don't think there's as much glimmer of hope in reality.
Okay.
There's some,
Okay.
but I mean, this was a dark year. um
Sure. Yeah, it was
this
for
this was this,
everyone.
it was a dark
Oh,
year with COVID, and the election was really ugly. And you hear stories all the time about ugliness involving poverty and people suffering, and so a lot of that it hangs heavy over this book. I'm not saying
sure.
that there's no hope in it, um, but it's definitely darker than Fries is.
Well, I think everything that we as authors undertake is a reflection of the times we live in, whether we're writing a period piece or whether we're writing something more modern. So I think you can't escape that.
Mm,
I think that that's to be expected. Some of that is going to seep into everything we write. And I think it's supposed to happen that way because that's how generations future will come to understand the society we're living in now.
Absolutely. I think writers are reporters. I tell students all
Sure.
the time, when it comes to social progress and social change, I tell them like artists of all kinds are always at the forefront of that. Artists are the reporters. Artists are the ones who are calling out the problems. You would hope that political leaders would be that way, but I tell kids all the time they're usually the last ones to do it. It's
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
writers and the people who are out there speaking for change and things that have got to be fixed. And it is, and that's the way I teach literature in the classroom too. It's all about like so much of it is historical commentary,
Yeah,
and it's
I
not.
I love the science fiction or the speculative fiction writers who use the description chronicler
Hmm.
because we as authors really are becoming the creators of the chronicles of our lives. I
Absolutely.
always saw Shakespeare that way. He was,
Oh yeah.
a chronicler of his time in life, and
Oh
so
gosh.
I've always loved that moniker for authors.
Shakespeare changed the game. Um,
Yeah,
Changed the game for storytelling. He was making commentary about society that was so far ahead of his time. And the critics of Shakespeare's time would just tear him apart and saying, "You can't tell stories like this. This isn't what Aristotle described in Poetics. You're breaking all the rules."
yeah. And
And
I love the way Shakespeare
there.
just looked at them and went, "Yeah, watch me."
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And now we read the guy in class. We've been reading his stuff for hundreds of years.
yeah,
And I mean, he changed everything. And so yeah, he was ahead of the game, and he's just one example.
right. I agree. Just one out of the many. So American Reality, I'd love to hear some from this. A brand new book, as I say, I haven't had a chance to read it yet. And I know that the people who came tonight are looking forward to hearing a little bit, and people watching us in replay on YouTube. So feel free, share as much as you'd like.
Okay, sounds good. I'm going to get started with a one of the darker pieces in the book, but it's also maybe my favorite poem I've ever written. Um,
Wow. Okay.
and It's a poem that I came to me one of the early nights of the pandemic. I was laying in bed and I was just thinking about like, wow, this isn't like cancer. This isn't, and that's horrible. But at least with cancer, most of the time, you have like if you're going to lose your life battling that, you usually have a few months to think about it, and prepare
Hmm.
yourself. With COVID, you read stories about people getting it and then like a week later they're gone. And that
Right.
scared the heck out of me. And so I thought about this piece. I'm like, man, I hope that I wake up in the morning and I'm not sick, because if I'm sick, who knows? And so
Right.
this piece came from that. It's called Dead End.
Right.
You used to love driving at night to escape ghosts and mundane realities. The road meant happiness in the form of exit ramps and taillights of fellow midnight Kerouacs in the distance ahead. Like you, they knew the world's greatest love song was the hum of the engine and the percussion of tires on pavement, with some Willie Nelson playing on the radio. The welcoming thought that a good night's sleep could be found at a mom and pop motel, and that a cup of coffee, a club sandwich, or both could be served by a smiling waitress at any hour, where streetlights, that gorgeous neon, appeared on the horizon. Even the smell of gasoline during an early AM fill up would make your heart beat faster, for as long as that motor was running, you felt alive. But the highway is dead now. Those city lights don't shine anymore. The 24-hour diners are closed. The jukeboxes no longer play. You're lucky if you can find an open McDonald's drive-through where a masked worker nervously accepts your card and gives you a greasy burger and fries that you now wonder if you should even eat. And there's no room at the Motor Inn. It's closed, perhaps permanently. You can't tell. But you sure know the road no longer feels like home. Home is where you're stuck in late night silence. You no longer have the miles ahead to look forward to when the sun rises. Instead, when your weary head hits the pillow, all you can do is pray in loneliness that life will one day return to the interstates, and that this dead end isn't forever, and that when you wake up, you'll still be able to breathe.
Wow. Well done. Thank you very much. That is a
Thank,
powerful piece.
thank you.
Um, it's really a gut wrenching introspection. Um, I, I'm, I think it's a courageous thing to write about that kind of searching within yourself, and that to write about that the difficulty of coming to what that reality is, where we are in this moment. I think there's tremendous courage in that. So I really want to acknowledge you for writing about that.
Thank you so much.
So what else is...
It was cathartic, I think, to write it too, to get the words down on the page. It was probably a month between the time I had the idea, the inspiration, when I actually got it down, just because it was hard to write.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, getting those words out, just bringing them to the surface and then putting them on the page, that can be a gut-wrenching process sometimes.
Absolutely.
What else have you got to share with us tonight?
Okay. This is a different piece. I've had some people tell me that it's another one about sharing vulnerabilities. I don't think it's about the same kind of vulnerabilities. One of the things I'm often inspired by is the art of others. And one of my favorite musical artists, Jason Isbell, he's one of my favorite singer-songwriters, not just of this generation, but of all time. And one of the things that he does really well is he combines a social commentator. Like, he comments on the world around him. He's super aware. He does all those like little small details that I love about good writing. And he speaks about the world around him. But he is also not afraid to show his vulnerabilities. I sometimes describe him as Bruce Springsteen meets Hank Williams Sr. The vulnerability of Hank Williams and the social commentary, the working class poet that Springsteen is. And so I got to thinking about my own life and my own experiences. And this piece, I guess it's partially a tribute to him, but it's also a piece about what I believe in and who I am as a husband and father. And so
excellent.
And a man. This piece is called For Helping Me Learn. Thank you for helping me learn how to be a real man, for Jason Isbell. Thank you for telling us that you don't know what being a real man means, because now I don't feel so alone. I've always preferred guitars over guns, and it made me an outcast growing up in a town where schools choose to celebrate deer season over Dr. King, violence and death over peace and love. Thank you for helping me understand that it's okay for men to cry, to be vulnerable, that strength isn't always about sucking it up, keeping up a granite countenance when inside you're a house of cards on a windy day, for telling me in rhyme that my day will come, that even on the hardest of days, to remember that things will get easier, that they can do so without the bottle or pills. Thanks for helping me see that, as beautiful as the open road can be, there is no shame in being tired of traveling alone. But also for showing me that a real man lets a woman drive too, that no relationship can thrive when one person is relegated to the passenger seat, and that when the road gets rocky, you can't just run away with your eyes closed, that if you want her to be your crutch when you can't stand on your feet, sometimes you better be willing to put her first, to let her take the wheel. And thanks for showing me that real strength is not found in a clenched fist, but in your character, and selflessness over selfishness, and asking what you have done to help others instead of what others have done to help you. That real men aren't afraid to stand up for what they believe in, that they don't just shut up and sing, but that they don't need a club or a sword when a pen, a paintbrush, a microphone will send a louder message, one that solves problems instead of starting them or making them worse. You need to know that I am listening, that you aren't just writing sad songs, riffing on that 59 Les Paul, giving the audience a 90-minute escape from their everyday realities. You aren't just a rock star, an artist, or a storyteller. You're a healer, an inspiration, an educator. And for helping teach me how to be a better husband to my wife, father to my children, and man, a real man in a world that needs them. Thank you. Thank you.
Well done. Wow. Has he heard that poem?
I don't know.
Okay.
I probably not.
I would love to hear his response. I think it would be great to see how it affects him.
Maybe
How fabulous that you can find all of those things in another creative soul.
it's one of those things that as a student of literature and as someone that tries to dabble in writing it myself sometimes, I get ideas from the world around me. I mean, you shared my bio earlier, and I
Sure.
think that rings true. I mean, my writing is about my observations of the world, and sometimes it's about what's happening around me, but a lot of the times I'm paying attention to what other people say too. And I look at that stuff, and I get inspired by my people I appreciate, people I love, their work I love, that I respect. And it just happens naturally, sometimes. And sometimes it's not even my favorite artist. Sometimes someone I'm not even paying attention to will write something, and I'll look at it and I'm like, wow, you know,
Yeah. A
that's
line or a
eyes
phrase or just a couple of words, a couplet will come to you from another source, and you think, oh my goodness, what about that? You know?
Absolutely. You just got to keep your eyes open. I tell people that all the time. Writer's block doesn't have to exist. I mean, you don't have to run out of topics to write about. Sometimes you just got to pay attention to the world around you, whether
Sure.
that's, you know, um, something that someone else is working on when it comes to writing, or people watching, as long as you're not being too creepy or whatever. Like there's
Right,
always
right,
something
right,
around you. There's always
right.
something around that you can use for inspiration.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Michael Beardsley commented, he said, House of Cards on a windy day is a great line.
Thank you.
I would agree. I think that's fabulous.
Thank you.
Um, all right. So I understand. Let's step away now from poetry, and
Yes.
Let's talk for a minute about short story, because you do write both in both of these books. You have a mixture of
Right.
both short story and poetry.
Right.
So let's talk for a minute about that difference. I mean, at the top of the program tonight, we sort of touched on how do you differentiate between poetry and essay. I guess my question about short story, because I struggle with short form. I enjoy the opportunity to go on tangents and dig into deep holes that I find in novels. Short form is a real challenge for me. So I wonder, is it a challenge for you? Is it more of a challenge for you to write short story than poetry, or vice versa? And then how does this affect the bigger picture of, will you someday write a novel, perhaps?
That's a great question. I I like, if I want to sit down and read something, I like reading poetry. I write more poetry than fiction. I'm probably a bigger fan of short stories as an art form than anything else, even more than a novel. I really like short stories a lot. Um, I sometimes describe them as a hybrid between a poem and a novel. Something that
Mm-hmm.
has a plot, something that has character growth, but is really just ultimately like a snapshot in time, something that doesn't take hundreds of pages to unravel. And like a poem, it's really thematic though. And I'm not saying novels aren't, but novels star characters and sometimes world building. And with short form, you don't really have time with that. There's some short stories I love where if you asked me to describe the characters, I couldn't even begin because there's not
Mm-hmm.
much there. It's all about the theme. And I think that a lot of short stories are really theme driven. The thing about short stories with me is I love them so much, and I love that art form so much. Sometimes I think I psych myself out. Um,
Okay.
And so I think that that's probably the primary reason as to why I don't write more short fiction um, than I do. But when I have an idea that I really like and I can't wait to sit down and write it, and it comes out, and I love the way it comes out, I'm almost more proud of my short stories than my poetry. But it's probably because I like short stories. I just love short stories.
Okay.
But as far as a novel goes, who knows? Um, I'm not trying to be like all coy or whatever like that, because I really don't have like a novel that I'm working on under my bed that I'm keeping a secret. I don't. Um, but will it happen one day? Maybe. I don't know what kind of novel it would be. Um, I imagine it would have all my favorite things in it, diners and music and cars and guitars and things like that. But who
Sure.
knows? We'll see. Maybe I will. I mean, it's not like there are plenty of novels that I love dearly, and so it's not something that I would completely shut out. Um, we'll
Right.
see.
And
We'll
and
see.
who knows, one day you may stumble upon that short form piece that more is hidden underneath it, and you might feel
Yeah,
strong enough to dig that out.
absolutely. I'm not going to lie to you. With Slice of American Pie, that's the one story where I have a sequel in mind. I don't know
Good.
if I would ever write it, but I have a sequel in mind. We'll see what
I
happens.
think you should write it and then maybe or maybe not publish it. But I believe that everybody should always write what comes into their imagination,
I agree.
because I just believe that everybody should put the word to paper and then let other people decide what to do with
Oh, I
it.
completely agree. That's one of the things I tell people all the time. Like once it gets out into the public space, the audience owns it. The audience owns the
Sure.
right to interpretation. Like who cares what the author intended? It's really a bit. I think that you can read literature and any really form of art in multiple ways. You know,
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
long as you can develop an argument and defend it and explain where you're coming from, and it's not just wild theories. That's your right.
And then there's the other option where wild theory is sometimes really entertaining.
Of
So
course. Oh, in my classroom, believe me, we've shared a few.
yeah,
we,
yeah,
we
I
all
can
have a good
imagine.
laugh about it.
Right. We're getting close to the end of our time, but I
Yeah,
really want to hear your short story piece.
yeah. And it
So
is a
it's
short one.
that's
It is a
fine.
relatively short piece.
I'm sure everyone would be very lenient if we go over time by a few minutes. We're having a good time tonight. So
Yeah,
um, go ahead and share this piece with
okay.
us, and then we'll see if we can take some questions from our audience. So those of you in the audience, if you'd like to put questions in the chat box that you have for Jared, feel free to do that, and we'll get to those right after this reading. Go
Sounds
ahead,
great.
sir.
All right. This piece is called A Reason to Believe. It is the final piece in the new book. Um, this is the one that I was telling you about earlier that started as a poem and became a
Mm-hmm.
story.
Okay.
A Reason to Believe. The day after I lost my job, I hit the road. I was absolutely devastated. I'd spent years there, hoping that if I kept at it, I'd finally able to pay off those damn student loans and make a life for myself. Prayed for it every night, hoping I'd be able to beat the odds and make this place my home. When they let me go, I felt like dying. I could never afford my rent on unemployment, let alone everything else I'd need to live in a metropolis like this. And I had no family to speak of or any friends. I wasn't antisocial. I just didn't have time to make any. The only thing I wanted to do was run away down some endless path of 2-lane highways to get as far away from that hell, my reality, as possible. An old song said that down every road there was always one more city, and I was determined to find out if it was true. I hope to God it was, because an infinite highway was the only light I could see at the end of the tunnel. But I found another light in a roadside diner called the Finish Line on the outskirts of a long forgotten town, in the eyes of an old man who struck up a conversation with a waiter once he stumbled in for a plate of chili cheese fries after working at a job where he'd been stuck for years. The pay wasn't great, he said, even in the town's glory days, his glory days. His eyes lit up before taking that first bite, as though he was Ponce de Leon and he had just found the fountain of youth. He was dying for a drink, but they didn't serve booze. The gooey cheese would do, he told the waiter. The indigestion might get him later, but he felt blessed in the moment, he told him, as a Fats Domino number playing on an ancient jukebox reminded him of the time he found his freedom years ago in a nearby roadside motel on a Saturday night with a pretty brunette he'd loved throughout high school. They turned off the lights and opened the curtains to let in the warm glow from the neon light outside while they danced to the Opry as it played from the radio on the nightstand. They never went to sleep that night, I overheard as he told his story. He knew he'd be too tired for church, but that was fine, for that moment was as close to heaven as he could imagine, or at least as close as he could get. He figured he'd never make enough to afford the train ticket. Unfortunately, his time in heaven was short, he said. She died a few years later. Cancer got her, like so many others who breathed in the dirty air from the factories, most of them now in ruins, on a daily basis while trying to make a paycheck to paycheck living. They had planned on getting married, and probably would have, had he not delayed in setting the date because he couldn't afford the perfect ring. She would have been fine with whatever, he said, but he desperately wanted to get the one she deserved. I looked at the waiter, whose tears were clearly visible even behind his glasses. He asked the man if there was anything he could do for him. Just a Coke for the road, he replied. It was what his love always requested before leaving a restaurant, and he had picked up the habit as a small tribute, in a way. Did you guys ever come here to eat? The finish line's been here since before I was born. Yes. But where is that motel? Only motel around here was the old Mercury Courts. Yep, headed out that way now. But it's just a shell? Yep, not much left of it now. Even the sign's gone. Rich man from the city bought it for his collection. God knows what he needs it for, how it could be so important to him. So why go? To remember. So much is gone now. The town, the motel, most of the people, most of my life. Figure I ain't got much time left, but my memories I still got, and they'll have to pry them from my cold, dead hands. The waiter walked away behind the counter. Within a minute, he returned with his drink in a plain white styrofoam cup. The man smiled and started to leave the diner. To this day, I don't know why, but I stood up from my nearby booth and approached him. Excuse me, sir? Yes? I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. All of it? Well, yeah. I don't mean to be nosy, but I am so sorry, and I just have to ask you something. What's that? How do you do it? Keep living, I mean. I don't think I could. Have to keep making money, kid. Saving as much as I can. I figure one day I'll walk in here for my chili fries and Coke, and this place really will be my finish line. When it happens and that train comes, even if I don't have money for a ticket, maybe I'll at least have enough to bribe the conductor and letting me hitch a ride. Maybe, if things work out, I'll get to dance with her in heaven again. Then he left. I watched him get into what appeared to be a skeleton of an old Chevy, and he pulled out of the finish line's parking lot. I felt the waiter tap me on the shoulder and tell me they were getting ready to close. I nodded and went back to my booth to gather my things. He asked if I needed anything before I left, and I told him just a Coke for the road. The waiter smiled and brought me my drink. Do you really think he'll go out to where that old motel used to be? He asked. Yes, thank God for that, too. So, where are you headed, man? Home.
Well done. Thank you very much. That's awesome. Mary says she loves the line "ticket for a train ride." It's very cool. It's so evocative. It's so visual, and at the same time, super emotional. I mean, I love the way you can paint that picture simultaneously with those visual cues and the emotional triggers as well. I think you do a beautiful job at that.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So we're going to go through the chat a little bit before we give away prizes. I know we're coming to the end of our session. Mary Beth says, wow, this should come with a sick hanky warning. Beautiful. Donnie says, that was wonderful. You read your poetry and stories with the same emphasis, which I love. And we know Donnie and we love Donnie and he's awesome. So Mary again says, bravo. So well done. This is so wonderful. Angela says, such an emotional story with great description. I would thoroughly agree. Mary also said that poetry helped her through this past year. I think it did everybody.
That's awesome.
Whether it was poetry that helped us through the year in the form of written poetry, or if it was poetry in the form of song.
Yes.
I think, anybody who says, oh, we don't need concerts, we don't need theater, I think we learned in this last year that these are essential pieces of our existence.
Absolutely. Right? I completely agree.
Absolutely. So I want to read this comment from Diana Duell. She says, I never thought I would like poetry, but I'm starting to read some and enjoying it. There's so much emotion in a short page or two. I'm enjoying your readings and will have to pick up your books. And if that comes from Diana, she knows, she's going to do it. She's got this huge indie library. Diana's an amazing friend of indie authors, and we are really, really blessed to have her in our corner. So thanks, Diana. We appreciate that. Are there any other, Elena says, I love the imagery in your work. What audience were you considering when you were writing your books? That's a great question.
That really is a good question. I think that because so much of my writing is about real experiences, both my own and the way I see people around me, people who are suffering, my heart goes, it always has gone out to people who are suffering, people who for any reason. And I think that part of the reason why I write is to write for people who I know are going through hard times of one kind or another. And I want, I guess, almost to let them know they're not alone. Mm-hmm. And I know that might sound kind of hokey, but I think it's true.
I don't think so. I think that's a genuine sentiment.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I'm one person and I can only be there in person for so many, but I feel like when I write something, if the right people can get a hold of it and read it or listen to it or whatever, that it's there to let people know that they're not the only one going through things. No one's on an island, and I want them.
Yeah, exactly.
And I want to help in any way I can, and I guess that's just one way of doing it. And so I guess my audience is for anyone who needs it, anyone who needs to read it.
That's awesome. That's very, very cool, because so often we hear our English professors say, know your audience. And sometimes I think it's okay to not know your audience.
Yes, I think so too.
Sometimes I think it's okay for your audience to stumble upon what you have and discover themselves, perhaps, in a piece that you write.
I completely agree.
Absolutely. So one last comment from Angela, and then we'll give stuff away. Angela says, no, letting people know they're not alone is so important. You don't always know who you help through your poetry or stories. And I think that that's absolutely true. You never know which person you're going to touch with a word or two.
I agree.
And that's why I think, and it's a big part of why I do what I do, why I support indie authors and why I try to bring more books to the world, is because you never know what's going to touch somebody and how it's going to affect them.
Absolutely.
And I love that idea of pushing things out into the world and having them reach the ears they're supposed to reach. Very cool thing.
I agree.
All right, we're going to give away some stuff, right?
All right.
Okay, so tonight we have some wonderful prize packages, Jared, that you've generously donated to this craziness. And I think this is just so cool of you to be so generous. So we're going to give away 5 different prizes tonight. We're going to spin our wheel of happiness. For those of you who haven't been to our festival, you're going to learn about the spinning wheel tonight. It's super fun. I like the spinning wheel of happiness mostly because it removes any guilt I might have for my friends not winning something. So there you go. It's completely self-serving. All right. So let me share the spinning wheel here. Jared, I need you to verify that you can see that.
I can.
Awesome. Okay, so we're going to do the list backwards from what we talked about in our green room, Jared. So we're going to start with, we're going to give away a copy of In the Space Between Universes, which is the book your wife wrote, correct?
Correct. My wife, Amanda R. Morningstar, the true great writer in this house.
Oh, you're going to do well in the house tonight. No doghouse for you. All right, so we're going to spin the wheel and give away Amanda's book. Here we go. The noise isn't coming through. I don't know what happened to the noise. It's supposed to have music to it, but there you go. Angela, congratulations. You've won Amanda's book. Yay! See, I don't know what happened. I don't know why the sound isn't there.
I heard it.
Did you hear it?
I did.
Okay, good. Then it's working. I couldn't hear it. So maybe it's my headset. It's a new headset. So, okay. So now we're going to give away a copy of American Reality, which is the new book that just came out in February. So we're going to, and of course, these books are going to be signed. So don't worry about that, folks. Okay, here we go. Newmeyer, you won a copy of American Reality. Well done. Yeah. All right, here we go. We are now going to give away a copy of American Fries. And again, Jerry's going to sign these books for you, so don't worry about that. Here we go. A copy of American Fries. The wheel. Look at that, Duck Sweet Pie, Brenna Dean, good job. Yay, Brenna, congratulations, you get a copy of American Fries. Now, earlier, Jared talked about musical influences in his writing, and he's giving away, very generously, 2 music CDs. Jared, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen here for a minute. Can you hold up those CDs and tell us just a little bit about the music?
Absolutely. The first disc I'm going to give away is the album Tape Deck Heart by Frank Turner. A lot of my work is really about social commentary and making social statements. Frank Turner is what I might describe as folk punk. Got a lot of attitude in his writing. He's a really great lyricist. This is a great album. And then I'm also going to give away a copy of Reunions by Jason Isbell. The poem that was written, Thank You, was inspired by him. And this is a phenomenal album as well. So
awesome.
Good stuff.
Wow. 2 music CDs. This is going to be fun. All right, let me see if I can get my spinning wheel of happiness back up there again. All right, here we go. This is for the music CDs. Yay, Natalia. I love your name, Natalia. It's so cool. I may have to steal your name and use it for a character in a book because that's a really great name. And then finally, Jared, you're going to give away a prize pack of all 3 books, right? So Amanda's book and your 2 books, American Fries and American Reality. We're going to give away all 3 of these to one lucky winner. Here we go, spinning the wheel. Yay, love this group. Matt Sauer. Good job, Matt. Yay, Matt, you won grand prize. 3 books written by the Morningstar team. Holy moly. All I can say about that is, Matt, you're going to love this work. It's so awesome. I've read Amanda's work as well, and she is spectacular. Jared, you got to work on her. She's got to do a reading with me. I would love to share her work with the world.
Thank you. I will. I promise I will get to work on that. Her work is just phenomenal.
It is. It's amazing. So I would love to have her on the program as well in the future and do festival with her. I'm just really impressed with Amanda's writing. So please pass that message along to her for me.
I absolutely will.
All right. Now, you're probably wondering at this point, okay, I've won prizes. How do I get them? Well, let me show you how you get them. This is how you get your prizes. Tonight, before midnight, you're going to write an email to Jared. There's his email address right here on the screen, jaredmorningstar@gmail.com. You're going to send an email to Jared and you're going to say, hey, Jared, I saw you at the Pages Promotions thing tonight and you were really cool and I won prizes. And Jared will send you prizes. Now, how is he going to send you prizes? Well, in that email, you're also going to include your mailing address. We're having you send the email so that we can maintain everybody's privacy and security so that you don't have to give us your mailing addresses in a public forum. So remember, everybody who won a prize tonight, send Jared an email at jaredmorningstar@gmail.com. For those of you who are watching us in replay, you didn't get a chance at the spinning wheel of happiness, you can contact Jared at jaredmorningstar.org. Learn all about his work and his books. His books are also available on Amazon, so you can find his work there. And again, he's on social media, primarily on Facebook and Instagram, so you can always connect with Jared there. Jared won't be with us for the summer festival in June, but he promises me that he'll be back in October. So yes, you can absolutely come and join us for our festivals in June and October and meet more indie authors. Speaking of the June festival, it's our summer reading regatta. These are the authors who are participating, and I just added 2 more to the list today that are not on this slide. But we now have 55 authors participating in our June festival. We're going to spend the entire month of June. Every day we have an event just like this one where we're going to share authors and their work, and we're going to give away free prizes, books, and oh my gosh, so much fun stuff. I've got authors sending me t-shirts and swag and book bags, and oh my God, we're going to have so much fun.
Nice.
So if you can't join us every night, not to worry, just pop in when you can. All the events are free. And we're also going to have workshops as well. They have a small $5 cost, but they're well worth it. We just have a blast. Come learn about some indie authors. Come share the world of crazy literature with us. It's going to be super fun. The festival, Mary, to answer your question, is promoted through Facebook. We do all of our festival events like we do tonight through Zoom. You can get the entire festival schedule on our Facebook page, virtual book festivals on Facebook, or you can find us at pagespromotions.com, and the entire calendar is there as well. We'd love to have you come back and join us. Jared, you were astounding tonight. Thank you so much.
Diana, thank you. This was a lot of fun.
Oh my gosh, so much fun. I love hearing authors read, but what I love most about doing these events is being able to dig inside under the skin and find out your process and find out what drives you. So that's what's super fun for me. So I appreciate you being so open and so willing to share yourself with us tonight.
It was all my pleasure. And I'm just thankful you gave me a chance to have a voice here.
Absolutely. You've always got a voice in my living room. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thanks everybody for coming out tonight.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much. Have a wonderful evening. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you again We're doing more of these this month. So jump on Facebook, check the events. We're doing more this month, one every week, I think, this month. And then we're going to come back and do one every day in June. So come back and join us. Jared, again, I appreciate your time, your energy, your gifts. Thank you so much for sharing yourself with us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you, Diana.
Have a great night, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.